In this last section of the chapter 4, we are going to talk about membranes, and we're going to focus on two types of membranes. In the membranes that surround the organs, that we have been talking about the epithelial, so we're going to focus on that. And in the other case, we're going to focus on the synovial membranes, that are the membranes that are form of connective tissue, not epithelial tissue, that surround bones and joints. Then we will move into the muscular tissue, and we will focus on very general aspects of three types of muscles. That is the smooth muscle, the cardiac muscle, and finally the skeletal muscle. And in the last section, we will go through in a very general way, talking about neurons, the different components of a neuron, the different parts of a neuron, and we will talk about neuron as excitable cells. So we're not going to talk a lot about the brain yet. We're just going to tell you what is the soma, what is the dendrites, all the different components, and we're going to talk about the importance of the neurons to send and receive signals. So let's start. So let's start talking about membranes, and let's define what is a membrane. When we talk about membranes in anatomy and physiology in this chapter, we are not talking anymore about cell membranes. We are talking about these structures that are a group of cells that are flat, that cover or line different body parts. So in your textbook, they show, for example, these two type of membranes, that in this case they are from epithelia. One that is a mucous membrane and another one that is a serous membrane. And the different why this is called a mucous membrane, because it has mucus that is secreted. And if you remember the goblet cells, you know that these are very important. This mucus is very important for the digestion. And in the same way, in the serous membrane is a fluid that lubricate the tissue for the respiration. Okay, but as I said before, not only the membranes are formed by epithelial, they can also be formed by connective tissue. So let's get into that. There are two types of membranes. The first type of membranes are epithelial membranes, and the second type of membranes are the synovial membranes that are formed by connective tissue. In the epithelial membranes, uh, one good example will be a cutaneous membrane, that it will be the skin, that we have talked for a little bit, that is formed by the dermis and the epidermis. And in the next class, we will talk in more detail what is the epidermis, what is the dermis, and all the different functions and structures that they have. Another example that we already talked is the mucous membrane, that is can be found in the intestine. Another one that we already talked is the serous membrane, that produces this liquid that lubricate structures. And later we will talk that some of them can be visceral and other ones can be parietal layers, like the pleura, pericardium, and peritoneum. So remember, this peri means that surround. So peri, that surrounds the heart, and here that surrounds the intestine, yeah. And here pleura refer to the lungs. Okay, so first type of membrane is an epithelial membrane, and we describe here three different types. Now we're going to talk about the second type of membranes, that is the synovial membranes. And the synovial membranes are located between bones, muscles, tendons, and ligaments. So here there is a clear example of a synovial membrane. In this slide, there are two schematics more. We will talk about the skin in the next lecture, so I'm going to only focus on this one. And here you can see in blue the synovial membrane, and also here surrounding the two bones. So here you have one bone, the other one, and the synovial membrane here surrounding these structures. Okay, so all the synovial membrane is in between that you find this orange region that is the synovial cavity that is contain all this synovial fluid that is secreted by the synovial membrane. And now in the here in the figure D that I'm going to that you can see here in yellow in, that I outline in yellow, you find the some characteristics similar to the membranes of epithelia. In this case, that they have cells, and those cells are flattened. So here you see all this group of cells that are the ones that are going to secrete the synovial fluid, and that you call it synoviocytes. And in addition to that, you have a connective tissue, the areolar connective tissue. You also have here adipocytes that you can see here, and all this you have a lot of fibers of collagen everywhere. Okay, so now that we talk about membranes, we are going to move into the muscular tissue. So at this point, you should be an expert on the two type of membranes that are covering the different structures of the body, so the epithelial membranes and the synovial membranes. Now we're going to talk about these three type of tissues that are the smooth, the cardiac, and the skeletal muscle tissues. So here you have two type of pictures. One that you can see the different muscle from a macroscopic perspective, and in the other one here you can see it from a microscopic. Yeah, so from the microscopic perspective, you can see the skeletal muscle that is located in all the muscles external that are required for movement. The smooth muscle is required in the blood vessels, in the arteries. So here you can see it. That is the one that it helps the pumping the blood. So you don't clog it in the blood vessels. And of course, the cardiac is located in the heart. So, and if you see all of them have different functions, they work differently, so they will have a different structure. So here we will talk about this muscular muscle, why they have this structure so organized, and we will talk about a word called something called sarcomeres that are very important, and we will talk about actin and myosin, but this we will do it in the following lectures. Right now, I want that you see, okay, how many nucleus these cells have, yeah? What are the shapes different, yeah? So these are the ways that we can differentiate these tissues and differentiate the functions. And I'm going to show you a way to study this. In your textbook, they have a wonderful, here is the link, a schematic of each one of these. So for example, the muscle tissues category is divided by its shapes, number of nuclei. So here you can see one in the cardiac, you can see multiple in the muscle, in the skeletal muscle, and the mechanism of stimulation. And later we will talk about that. But remember, here is the link. This is a great resource that have everything there for you to help you to study much easier. That I know that this is a lot of material. So here you can see an example of the skeletal muscle tissue, and I want that you observe some of the characteristics. So first of all, if you see here, you find one nucleus, two nucleus, three nucleus. So in other words, this one is multinucleated, and you can see the nucleus also not only in the schematic, but you can see it here. Okay, here you can see also that is long, that is cylindrical, and is longer. The cells are longer compared to the cardiac tissue or muscular tissue, or longer compared to the intestine or organs that have muscles there. So in addition, if you see is cylindrical, and here you see the striations, yeah, these lines that are founded here. And later in the semester, we are going to see, okay, at the molecular level, when you study the proteins, you can understand why you find this striated organization. And in addition, you see all these parallel rows of this striated tissue. In addition to that, you see that the function, as we said here, you see here is the core. So the core of your muscle, as we talked before, they are very important to balance the posture and also the muscles when you're moving. If you work out, you warm up, yeah. So the muscles are also related to the thermoregulation. They play a key role, and to move a muscle, and we will cover that in more detail in the class of the muscles. The muscle, what they are doing is pulling the bones using the tendons. Okay, so now let's recap all the things that I told you about the skeletal muscle tissue. Let me delete this for you. So first thing that I told you is that it's long compared to other muscle tissue, cylindrical, and if you see here, there is no branch. This is different from the cardiac muscle tissue. It's striated fibers that are arranged in parallel rows. I also told you that they are multinucleated. And if you see here, I forgot to tell you they are periphery, that are located in the periphery of the cell. Why? Because most of the parts, most of the cytoplasm of the muscle tissue, you will find is this structure that are protein structures that are involved in the muscle contraction. Finally, I told you that the functions involve motion, the posture, and the heat production. And remember, all these muscles in the skeletal muscle, you have control of those. Yeah. So if you don't have control of your heart, you don't say stop beating or increase the beating. Yeah. On the other hand, what you can do is say like I want to run, I want to move my arm up or down. So this is a voluntary control. And finally, is usually attached to bones and tendons. The second type of muscular tissue that we're going to talk today is the cardiac tissue. And there are some similarities and some difference with the muscle tissue. So if you observe this schematic here, you clearly see that there are some similarities and some difference. So let's talk about some difference. So if you look at the nucleus, here, especially in your schematic, that is easier than looking at least in the beginning, than the real heart. So what you see is that here we are talking about a nucleus that is centrally located, yeah, that generally is mononucleated, although there are times that there could be two nuclei. In addition to that, you see that another difference is that these fibers are not long and cylindrical. What you see here is that the fibers are branched and short. Okay, but what are the similarities? So when you see here, let's move into this, you still have a striated structure. So you have all these lines that you see there that are that make it these striations, yeah, this striated tissue. Later, we will talk about the intercalated disc. Remember that the heart need to contract synchronously, yeah. So to pump the blood, all the muscle has to contract at the same time. And to do that, you need to have strong connections. And later we will talk about the importance of these structures called intercalated disc. Uh, Now let's move into the function. So the function is pretty easy. The heart is pumping blood to all parts of the body, and different from the muscles in your legs and in your hands, you don't control the heart. When you say to the heart, start pumping blood, yeah, start pumping, stop now, start, yeah, you don't do that. This is controlled by your nervous system. And finally, the location of this muscle tissue is in the heart of the wall in a tissue called myocardium. So let's recap. I told you there are some similarities and some difference. So difference are that it's short and that there are one or two centrally located nuclei fibers. The similarities are here. That is still branched and is striated. In addition to that, I told you that the function is pumping blood to all parts of the body and that there is an involuntary control. And finally, I told you that the location is the heart wall, that is the myocardium. Now we're going to talk about the last muscle tissue that is also known as visceral muscle tissue. Is located in the digestive system, for example, in the stomach, in the intestine, that it need to some muscle contractions to perform their functions. Also, for example, it is also located in the arteries. Why? Because in addition to the heart, arteries and different blood vessels require small contractions to help the blood to circulate. And here you can see in a schematic. Let me indicate it here to you. And here you see the real tissue again. And what you see here is very clear. There is many difference. So if you look at here, for example, the shape of the cell is very different. Here you see a spindle shape fiber. You don't see striated cells here. And the nucleus, if you see, is is located centrally and is only one nucleus. Okay, so very different to what we said before. And here are the thing that we talk. Remember, difference are the shape, because this one is spindle shaped fibers. They are non-striated, that are also different. And here, this is different to the skeletal muscle, but similar to the cardiac muscle, that is one nucleus that is located centrally. So I also told you that these hollow organs, like the blood vessels, they are moving content, in this case blood, but not are only ones. The digestive system also have muscles that help them to move all the food that when you ingest it while you eat. So remember the locations. It will be in walls of hollow organs, including the blood vessels, also the lymphatic vessels. I also told you the digestive tract. In the case of the reproductive tract, is women when they are going to have babies, they need to have muscle contractions to again move a content. In this case, it's not blood. In this case, it's not food. In this case, it will be to help the baby to go outside of the body, and of course, the respiratory tract where you are moving air, yeah, oxygen and CO2. So in all these cases, the function will be the propulsion of content through the hollow organs, and uh, again, similar to the cardiac muscles, it is involuntary. In other words, you don't think about breathing, yeah, you don't think about, oh, I need to inhale, exhale. You can do it in yoga, but to make it more conscious. But generally, you are not thinking about that. You are not thinking about, oh, each one of my vessels in my body should be should be help the body to circulate from one region to another one. This doesn't happen. Okay, so with this, we finish the three types of muscle tissues. So at this point, we already talked about the different membranes that are surrounding each one of your organs. You also need to know about the three type of muscle tissues that they have similarities and but also have difference. And now we're moving into the last one, that we're going to move into the nervous tissue. When we think about the nervous system, we think about the brain, we think about the spinal cord, and we will talk about the different parts of the brain during the course. We will talk about other different parts, other parts of the nervous system that are located inside of your skull, and also the autonomous, the peripheral system. We will talk about a lot of things, but independent of that, we the unit of the nervous system is the neuron. And neurons have the ability to respond to a stimulus. That, as we talked before, is a characteristic called irritability or responsiveness. So this is important that you remember. Later, we will talk about each one of the components of the neuron. The function of the neuron, if you think about that, right now you're listening to something and you're watching a video. Yeah, so you have neurons there that are turning all that information into electrical impulses. Yeah, and your brain start working, and you maybe are taking notes. So your brain help you to not only to listen, to comprehend all this information, and help you to move also your hand to take notes. So in other words, you're detecting a stimuli, and you're converting that stimuli into a nerve impulse. Um, so remember, to recap, we talk about neurons that are the unit of the nervous system, and they have a characteristic that we talked before in the course, in the beginning of the semester, that is irritability or responsiveness, that is the ability to respond to a stimulus. We also talk about the functions, that is to detect stimulation and convert it into an electrical impulses, and you conduct impulses to other neurons. You can conduct responses to muscle cells. Yeah, so as I told you, you maybe right now you're writing. Yeah, so that is because it's a neuron that is telling you you have to is sending an impulse to move the muscles, and also to different type of glands. In this slide, I'm going to give you a very general background about the structural characteristics of neurons. Many of you already know most of those things. So the first uh, structure that we're going to talk is the cell body. Then I will talk a little bit about the second one, that it will be the dendrites, and the third one, it will be the axon. So if you see the cell body, here what you see is that the cell body contains the nucleus, and here you see all these organelles. Yeah, the cell body can be also called soma, S-O-M-A. Sorry, there is no space. Maybe I can write it here. Soma. Okay, soma. Perfect. And surrounding the soma, you will find these tree-like structures that are here, that are called dendrites. And the dendrites are in charge of carrying the signal toward the cell body. So in the same way that you have ears that are receiving signals in form of sound and they send it to the brain, here the dendrite also receive signal from another neuron, and they carry it to the cell body, and then the cell body move it down to the axon. That is the third structure. So the third structure is the axon that carries the signal away from the cell body and contain other structures. We, in future classes, we will talk more in detail about this trigger zone. Remember, neurons turn chemical impulses into electrical, and it's very important to have something called action potential that we will cover later. And similar to the cable of your computer that is plugged to the wall, that is carrying electricity, those cables are surrounded by plastic that insulate them. The neurons also have structures that insulate them, and that are just mainly covers of lipids that we will talk more about later. We can also will talk about axon terminals, that inside of that you have synaptic end bulbs that they are responsible to produce vesicles. Neurotransmitters will be released there. Um, Calcium will be also around that area. About this axon terminal, there is a lot of things that we will talk. But for this structure, or for this class, we just need to remember that there are three main bodies. There are three anatomical regions: the dendrites that carry the signal toward the cell body or soma, that is the one that contains the nucleus. And finally, the axon that carries the signal away from the cell body. And this one contains axon terminals and synaptic end bulbs. Something that maybe you haven't heard before is this term neuroglia. That are other cells that are not as famous as the neurons, but they are also very important in the nervous system, and they are in charge of protecting and support neurons. And we will talk more later on. In particular, we will cover them in when we talk about in the chapter of the nervous system. And again, I'm a big fan of your textbook, so here they explain this in a lot of detail, the different components, the different structures, and here they tell you more about all these different structures that we will cover later. So I highly recommend you to go and cover those topics and study those things. You can also find information about the neuroglia. So here, all these cells that maybe you have never heard about it, you find information there. And we are going to cover them later in a lot of detail, but you can give it a look and study and learn more about that from your textbook. To finish this section, I just remind you that we have been talking about excitable cells before, that this is a property of different cells, and in this case, muscles and neurons have the property of respond to stimuli, in this case to electrical stimuli, so they are electrically excitable cells. And we previously said that all these electrical signals come from the dendrite, travel to the soma, and then go all over, travel all this distance to go to the axon. And at the end, you might have here, for example, different proteins like voltage gate proteins. And when they detect this electrical current, they can open, they can close, and they can release different neurotransmitters or calcium or different. They produce they have a response to that. Okay, so just to remind you, we have talked this before. Neurons and muscle fibers are considered excitable cells because they exhibit electrical excitability. The electrical excitability is to the ability to respond to an electrical stimuli, and how they do it by producing electrical signals such as the action potentials that we will talk about that. And those action potentials, they travel from the plasma membrane, and in this case here they can have changes, they can produce changes in proteins like the voltage gated channel. And finally, we're going to talk about tissue repair and aging. And you have heard so much about aging that, for example, Alzheimer, what is happening to your brain? You know, you are able to grow back your hair, but even your hair start turning white. So what happened when we age with those cells? So tissue repair is the process that replaces cells. So sometimes they are worn out, sometimes they are damaged. So you can have an injury, you can have dead cells, yeah, and tissue repair is very important. And for example, in epithelia, uh, one key component uh, is the stem cells. So you will find the differentiating cell, yeah, that they are fulfilling a function. Here, before that, you have cells that are becoming functional, and before that, you have these stem cells that are not differentiated. Yeah, so in epithelia, the cells are replaced by division of the stem cells that are undifferentiated. And this is a very general feature that I'm just telling you, but just remember that the stem cells are very important. And in other parts of the body, different from epithelia, they have limited repair potential. So, for example, not all the connective tissues have the ability to be repaired. Muscle cells that can also perform limited repair. And for example, areas of the brain, they also have limited potential to be repaired. Although before they thought that they don't perform cell division, that they were not stem cells, they have been found that there is, but there is not as big as cells as tissues like the epithelia. Okay, so we're done for today. At the end of this class, I'm sure that you should remember that you have membranes surrounding different body organs, that you remember that there are different muscular tissues. Yeah, that there is the smooth, the cardiac, and the skeletal, and all of them that they have different structure and functions. And finally, we talk about the nervous tissue, and I told you about the property of the neurons and muscle cells to be excitable. Also, I told you the structure, the anatomical structure of the neurons, and I finished telling you, tissue repair is a very important area of research, and while epithelial repair very fast, other tissues they don't do it as well. So, for example, the neurons, there is a lot of research because they found that they definitely have a potential to repair. So we wanted to increase that potential. And to finish, I hope that at the end of the class, now when you see this in the lab in more detail, you will reinforce all the things that you learn. And you can, for example, not tell me what is this type of tissue. This one is also easy, but also there are other ones that you will start be able to differentiate or to guess much better after uh, having not only this theoretical knowledge, but also the lab knowledge that you will get, practical knowledge that you will get in the lab. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this section and have a good day. Bye.